This really happened to me in Ohio. Right after my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "You have 3 days to get out." Just like that. No kindness. No care. So I quietly packed my things and took back the house key she thought I'd hand over without a word. She must have thought I was weak. But I wasn't weak. I was just being polite. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking cold as the wind that morning. "What are you waiting for? That's your suitcase. You're a burden in my house," she snapped. Then, thud, she threw my suitcase out onto the wet grass like it was garbage. The sound it made hitting the ground seemed louder than it should have, maybe because it was stuffed with all the quiet years I had spent swallowing my hurt for the sake of peace. I stared at the bag lying there. One of the wheels was cracked. The leather handle still had Daniel's initials on it. He'd saved up to buy me that bag years ago, before I went on a trip to Boston. I'd only used it a handful of times. Now here it was again, for what felt like the saddest reason of all. "You heard me," she said sharply. 3 days. I've already called a locksmith. But I didn't answer. Not yet. I just bent down, picked up the suitcase, brushed off the mud. The zipper was open halfway. Inside were my scarves, my little pill organizer, and the envelope holding Daniel's death certificate. She hadn't even bothered to close it before tossing it out. When I looked up, she was already walking away, like I was nothing more than some old box she wanted to get rid of. Now that the funeral was done, I carried my suitcase down the short path to the curb and sat on the concrete step. I pulled out my phone. You'd think I'd call a taxi, or maybe my cousin in Youngstown, who once said I could stay in her guest room. But no. The first number I dialed was the county assessor's office. "I'd like a property survey, please," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This week, if possible. I'm the co-owner of this house. I think there's been some confusion about whose name is on the deed." See, Emily thought I was helpless. But I wasn't. I was just quiet. 3 days before this moment, we'd buried Daniel, my son, my only child. Pancreatic cancer stole him from me so fast it made my head spin. 1 minute he was working long hours and playing with Tommy in the yard. The next, he was thin, silent, hooked up to machines that beeped more than they breathed. Emily never shed a tear. Not even when the nurse said he was gone. She just checked her watch and called the funeral home. I stood there holding his hand, still warm, while she was already making plans. That should have been my first warning. At the funeral, she wore shiny black silk and pearls. Not to mourn. To control. She planned every last thing. I wasn't allowed to read, to speak, to even say a prayer for my boy. "It's better this way," she said. "You might get too emotional." Imagine that, too emotional at my own son's funeral. So I sat in the back, like some stranger, pretending to be strong, smiling for people who whispered how sorry they were. Meanwhile, she stood front and center, playing the part of the grieving widow. I didn't cry until I got home. I didn't scream until she threw me out. Emily and I were never close. But for Daniel's sake, I kept the peace. At first, she tried to be nice. After the wedding, that changed. Daniel called less. I wasn't welcome without notice. She made it clear Tommy shouldn't be left alone with me unless she said so. I was gently pushed out, like old furniture nobody wanted anymore. And I let it happen. For him. Even Daniel noticed. Once, when I dropped off a pot roast without calling first, he hugged me in the garage and snuck me in the back door like a teenager. "She doesn't mean anything by it, Ma," he whispered. "She's just stressed. Stressed. Busy. Always some excuse." But now I was the one left grieving. I'd buried my son. And now she wanted to bury me too, out of his house, his life, his memory. But I wasn't going quietly. I packed my bag without a word. I let her throw it on the lawn. And then I called someone who remembered the truth. The surveyor came on Thursday morning. A middle-aged man named Cliff with a clipboard, all business. I met him at the gate with coffee and the original papers. Daniel and I had signed them before his wedding. "Joint tenancy," I said, pointing to the line. "Filed 2018. Before the marriage." Cliff adjusted his glasses. "Still active?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes. Very much so." Emily thought she'd won. But the house was mine, too. Emily had never been added to the house deed. She just assumed the place would be hers because Daniel was gone. Cliff, the surveyor, gave a low whistle when he checked the papers. "A lot of folks think they inherit everything by default," he said. "But they don't." He walked slowly around the yard, taking photos and notes. His report would take a few days to finish, but we both already knew what it would say. The house was still mine. Half mine, at least. And without a legal change or a real will saying otherwise, it might even be more than half. Emily never called a lawyer before she threw me out. She didn't check the title. She didn't bother to look in the little fireproof. Box Daniel once told me to keep safe, just in case, Ma, he'd said. But I had looked. I knew what was in there. And now her 3-day deadline had passed. I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't leaving. I was coming back home. That night, sitting in a small motel room down the road, a quiet place that smelled like lavender and dust, I opened Daniel's laptop. The one he used in his last months. The one Emily never touched. He'd never changed the password. When I logged in, I found more than old family photos. I found the first clue that something was very wrong. But that's another part of the story. That part was just beginning. You know, they always say a mother knows when something's wrong with her child, when they're hungry, tired, hurting. I used to believe that. Until I realized I hadn't heard my son's real voice, his honest, open voice, in almost a year before he died. Daniel was my miracle. I had him late, at 38, after 5 miscarriages and a marriage that didn't survive all that heartbreak. When he came into the world, he was so quiet, so watchful. And that's how he left, too. But in between? Oh, he was the sweetest boy. Always gentle, always thoughtful. When other kids wanted noisy toys, Daniel wanted books. He preferred helping me fold laundry over throwing tantrums. He was my little old man, trying to take care of me after his father passed away. We weren't just mother and son, we were a team. I used to think nothing could come between that. Then came Emily. She was never loud. Never openly cruel. No, Emily knew how to smile for the camera, how to say all the right little things. But her eyes were always scanning the room, like she was searching for something better than what she had. I remember the first dinner she came to. She brought a fancy bottle of wine and a scented candle. But I didn't drink, and I already had candles on the table. She noticed. After that, she never came empty-handed, but it always felt like she was offering little reminders that she was in control. Like that first Thanksgiving after they got engaged. I made Daniel's favorite, cornbread stuffing with smoked paprika. Just like his grandpa used to love. Emily took one polite bite and said, "Oh, it's so rustic." She smiled like it was a compliment. But after that, Daniel never touched my stuffing again. By the time they were married, she had him drinking almond milk, doing yoga, and talking about emotional boundaries. He started saying things like, "We don't want to live in the past, Ma. We need to protect our peace." Our peace. Like I was some noisy stranger disturbing their quiet life. He used to call me every Sunday. Then it became every other Sunday. Then, "Let's just text, okay?" And I let it happen. That's the part that keeps me awake some nights. I let him slip away. I thought that's what good mothers do. You step back. You let them build their own lives, even if it means you get left behind. But I watched. Oh, I watched. I watched how Emily ran everything, what they bought, how they decorated, how Daniel, who once stood up to bullies, now looked at her for permission to speak. How he hesitated before inviting me over, like he had to get clearance. When Tommy was born, I thought maybe now I'd be needed again. And for a while, I was. Emily had a C-section and needed help. I cooked, I cleaned, I rocked that baby to sleep. I stayed up through the night so they could rest. I slept in the nursery for 2 whole weeks, loving that baby like he was mine. But once Emily healed, the door started closing again. I'd show up and find it locked from the inside. She'd meet me at the door saying things like, "Tommy's overstimulated today," or, "We're doing a screen-free afternoon." When I asked if I could show him old family videos, she'd smile that tight smile and say no. Then Daniel got sick. He called me after his appointment. His voice was rough, small, like it didn't belong to him. "They found something, Ma. Pancreas. Stage 4. I stood in my kitchen holding a dish towel and a potato, frozen in place. "Oh, baby," I whispered. He didn't cry. Daniel never cried. But I did. After the call ended, I sat on the floor and wept into that dish towel. Like it could wipe away the truth. I moved into the guest room a week later. And that's where the rest of the story started to unfold. Moments, all those little instincts I'd ignored came rushing back. The locked doors, the whispered phone calls, the girls' weekends that stretched a little too long. Emily was never where she said she was. And Daniel? He was dying while she laughed in hotel rooms and walked beaches with strangers. I closed the laptop gently, like touching something fragile. My breath came shallow. I wasn't surprised. Not really. A mother always knows. Somewhere deep down, even when she doesn't want to admit it. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. She hadn't only taken Daniel's time, his attention, his trust, she'd taken his last days, too. Days he should have spent with his son. With me. With family. Not sitting in quiet sedation while his wife played widow before he was even gone. For the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Not because I was happy. But because the story Emily thought she'd finished wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house was mine, legally, rightfully, provably. But that was only the beginning. Emily had thrown me out thinking I was powerless. But she forgot whose name was still on the deed. She forgot who Daniel trusted with his files, his passwords, his private life. I clicked through the rest of the folder. Receipts. Hotel bookings under her name and someone else's. Restaurant bills from places nowhere near that spa she'd sworn she visited. Proof. Solid, damning proof. And I knew just who to call. In the morning, after coffee and a quiet moment sitting by the window, I called a lawyer. Not a cheap one. Not a local friend doing favors. A real one, the kind who knew what to do with photos and hotel bills and broken promises. The kind who could make sure Emily didn't get Daniel's life insurance. Or his half of the house. Or custody of the sweet little boy who didn't deserve any of this. I wasn't going to fight out of bitterness. Not revenge. But for Daniel. For Tommy. For the life Emily had tried to erase along with me. As I ended the call, I looked at Daniel's old laptop sitting quietly on the kitchen table. For the first time in months, I felt something sharp and clear cut through the fog of grief. I felt purpose. And I whispered to the empty room, "It's not over, baby. Mama's not done yet." At night, Emily would tell me she was going out to clear her head. But she always came back late, smelling like citrus and sweat. She missed hospice visits more than once. At first, I told myself she was just stressed, trying to cope in her own way. But deep down, the truth was right there, staring me in the face, little by little. Emily wasn't mourning. She wasn't sad. She was free. And poor Daniel, maybe he never knew. Or maybe he did but was too weak to say it out loud. One day, I opened my old emails and searched for a name I'd seen in a photo tag, Jonathan Lynn. Nothing came up under Daniel's name. But when I checked Emily's emails, there were dozens. Messages she had forwarded to Daniel. Cold, dry, full of medical details. No kind words. No warmth. No love, Emily at the end. Just cold facts. Then I looked in Daniel's drafts folder. My heart stopped. There was a message he'd written 2 weeks before he died. He never sent it. It read, "If you're reading this, I guess I couldn't find the words. Something's wrong. I feel like Emily's lying to me, about the money, about the will. She won't let me talk to anyone but her doctor. I'm scared, but I'm too tired to fight her. Please, if something happens to me, don't let her get away with it. I love you." That was it. The cursor still blinked at the end, waiting. He saved the message but never hit send. Why? Was he afraid? Was he too sick? Or, did Emily catch him writing it? I didn't know. But now I had something. I had suspicion. Turning into proof. And I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I went to the little old library down the street. You know, the one with dusty shelves and that cranky printer that jams every time you need it? The librarian, Mrs. Wynne, she used to be Daniel's spelling bee teacher, let me use the computer. I searched through public records, house sales, legal papers, wills, death certificates. And there it was. Daniel's will. Filed just 2 days before he died. Signed in shaky handwriting. Witnessed by one of Emily's coworkers. My stomach flipped. I pulled out the last birthday card Daniel had sent me, just a month before. His real signature. And it didn't match the will. Not even close. She forged it. Emily faked the very paper that gave her everything, Daniel's house, his money, even the right to raise little Tommy. My hands shook. I had 3 things now, her motive, her method, and her big mistake. But I needed help. Real help. So I made a call I hadn't made in years. To someone who owed me a favor. They say old folks slow down, but you've never seen a group of retired friends catch the scent of a good scandal. It had been ages since I'd seen Max, Jean, and Robbie together in one room. The sharpest bunch I knew. We used to joke that if we made a club, we'd call it the Wrinkle Watchdogs. We never did. But I always knew, one day I'd need their skills. Max had been a defense lawyer for 42 years. He retired, but his garage was still packed with old case files, just in case, he used to say. Jean was a reporter for the Ohio Ledger. She didn't ask for permission, only forgiveness. Fired 3 times, hired back twice. She knew everyone. And Robbie? The sneakiest private I ever met. The man could find dirt on a priest if he wanted. Could probably track a mouse in a snowstorm. I called Max first. "I need help," I said. He didn't even ask why. "My place. Tuesday. Bring pie." When I showed up, Jean and Robbie were already there. Jean had coffee and a folder marked, "Possible felony." Robbie was popping sunflower seeds like he had all the time in the world. Max adjusted his glasses. "So, who's the target?" he asked. "Emily," I said. "My daughter-in-law." Jean raised an eyebrow. "The one who smiles like she's always lying?" I nodded. Then I told them everything, the fake will, the secret emails, Daniel's unsent message. The way she pushed me out the door before his body was even cold. When I finished, Jean's mouth was tight. Max was scribbling notes like crazy. Robbie had stopped chewing. "So you're saying," Robbie said slowly, "she used his illness to grab his money while sneaking around with another man?" I nodded. "And I think she faked the will, too." "Damn," Max muttered. "I've seen rich CEOs do less damage with an army of lawyers." "She's sloppy," Jean said. "That means we can catch her." I looked at them all. My voice didn't shake. "Will you help me?" Max folded his arms. "Let's split this up." He pointed to Jean. "You find out everything about this Jonathan Lynn. Social media, taxes, the works. See who he really is, how long this has been going on," and just like that, the hunt began. Max turned to Robbie next. "You get Daniel's medical records." Quietly. "I want to know who signed off on every change and when." Then he looked at me. "And you, Ruth, you stay calm. No phone calls, no yelling." "Not yet," Robbie smirked. "Oh, she's not going to cause a scene. She's going to outlive them. And outsmart them." I smiled. "That's the plan." And just like that, the wrinkle watchdogs were back in action. It didn't even take 2 weeks for the truth to crawl out from under the neat little lies Emily had built. Jean struck gold first. She called me, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Ruth, he's not just some fling. Jonathan Lynn has been in the picture for 3 years. They met at some real estate seminar in Columbus. And guess what? He listed Emily as his emergency contact at his fancy private gym. She's been paying his membership in cash for 2 years." I gripped the phone tighter. "What else?" "He doesn't have a job." "Nothing. The only thing in his name is a lease on an apartment." Emily co-signed. "She's been paying all his bills, Ruth. Every single one. While Daniel was sick in bed, she was taking care of this guy." I couldn't even speak. The words sat like heavy stones in my stomach. Meanwhile, Robbie, the sneaky ghost he is, had slipped a $50 bill to one of the nurse's aides at the hospice where Daniel spent his last weeks. The woman was nervous, but willing to talk. "I remember her," the aide said, meaning Emily. "Always on her phone. Never cried. Never stayed overnight. Not once." Robbie gently asked about Daniel's meds. "Emily managed all of them herself," the aide said. "She told us not to adjust anything without asking her first. Said she had a background in pharmaceuticals." But the head nurse told a different story. Emily had no such background. Then came the worst part. "She carried a locked briefcase," the aide whispered. "I saw her slip papers into it once. Looked like documents of some kind." Robbie got the aide to write and sign a statement. While they were busy digging, Max was knee-deep in forensics. He'd sent Daniel's will, the one filed just 2 days before his death, to a trusted handwriting expert he knew from an old court case. 3 days later, we all gathered in Max's garage. The place smelled like motor oil and old secrets. "She forged it," Max said simply. He handed me 2 papers. One was the will from the court. The other was a birthday card Daniel had sent me a month before. Max had copied it from my photo album. "See the D?" Max pointed. "Completely different. The loops, the way it curves. And look at the T in Thompson, hers is rushed, sloppy. Daniel always made careful, rounded letters." Jean added, "And the notary who signed the will? Not a real notary. Just a friend of Jonathan's. Not licensed at all." Then Robbie pulled out a flash drive. "Audio recording," he said. "Got this at a coffee shop downtown." He plugged it in and hit play. Emily's voice came through, clear and cold. "He's barely hanging on, John. I have to file this before his next scan. If hospice changes his meds again, he might actually start talking." Then they both laughed. Jonathan's voice came next. "Just get the money, babe." That was enough. Max looked at me, fire in his eyes behind his thick glasses. "We've got motive. Fraud. Forgery. Medical neglect. Enough for a civil suit. Maybe even criminal charges." Jean crossed her arms. "And guardianship of little Tommy, too." Max nodded. "If we play this smart." My knees felt weak. I sat down on an old box full of dusty legal files. All those months I'd wondered, am I imagining this? Am I just a bitter, grieving old woman losing her mind? But no. The truth had been sitting there the whole time, waiting for someone too old to matter, but too stubborn to forget. We spent the rest of the night planning. Max would file an emergency order to freeze the will. Jean would leak the photos and recordings to a friendly reporter she knew, just in case Emily tried to spin her own story to the public. And Robbie? He'd tip off the probate judge, quietly, with a little anonymous information. And me? I would cook. I would invite the whole family, Daniel's aunts, uncles, cousins, for one last dinner. One last supper. One quiet, unexpected reckoning. I cooked for 2 straight days. Roast beef, garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cornbread, pecan pie, all of Daniel's favorite foods. I even set the table with the old china he remembered from holidays as a boy. I pulled out the fancy cloth napkins, the ones Emily used to call quaint. When Emily arrived, dressed sharp in a pencil skirt and her usual fake smile, she glanced around at the crowded room. "Is this a celebration?" she asked, forcing a polite little laugh. "Of course," I said, smiling wide. "A proper thank you dinner." She looked at the long table, family hugging, laughing, catching up. Daniel's Aunt Shirley, Uncle Lou, his cousins from Akron. Even his godmother from Michigan had flown in. "I wanted to honor Daniel properly," I said softly. "With the people who actually knew him." Emily smiled, but it was thin and tight, like wire pulled too far. "Well," she said, her voice sweet but strained, "that's thoughtful of you." I smiled wider. She had no idea what was coming. Emily had no idea. Dinner started with a prayer, Daniel's favorite hymn playing low in the background. I said grace, my voice steady and firm, thanking everyone for coming. We passed the dishes, shared old stories. The room was filled with warmth, with memories, almost like old times. Until Max stood up. He cleared his throat gently. "I hope you don't mind," he said politely, "but Ruth asked me to share something tonight. A legal clarification, if you will." Emily blinked, fork halfway to her mouth. Max set a stack of folders right in the center of the table. As Daniel's former family attorney and longtime friend, I think it's important to set the record straight. He opened the first folder. "This," he said, holding up a paper, "is Daniel's original will. Dated 2021. Signed clearly, in full health, notarized properly by an independent professional. It leaves everything, his house, his assets, and guardianship of little Tommy, to Ruth, his mother." Aunt Shirley gasped. Emily pushed back from the table, eyes flashing. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. Daniel updated the will. Max raised a hand, calm and sure. "Yes. And this," he lifted the second folder, "is the forged version. The one you filed. Signed when Daniel was heavily medicated. Barely conscious. Witnessed by someone tied to Jonathan Lynn. Not a licensed notary at all." Emily's eyes widened, her mouth opening, closing, searching for words. Jean stood then. Calm. Cold. "Funny," she said, sliding another folder onto the table. "Because here you are, with Jonathan. On a yacht. Myrtle Beach. April 4th. While Daniel was dying in hospice care." She let the photo spill out. Full color. Smiling. Holding drinks. Gasps spread around the table like a spark on dry leaves. Emily's own mother covered her mouth. Uncle Lou squinted, leaning closer. "Isn't that the same week Daniel slipped into organ failure?" he asked. Robbie stood. His voice was quiet, but firm. "Yes. April 4th, Daniel's vitals crashed. That day." Emily told hospice staff she was out visiting family. But she was here. With Jonathan. Emily backed away from the table, her face pale. "This is slander," she hissed. "No," I said softly, standing. "This is truth." I walked to the head of the table and laid down a sealed envelope. "This is a letter Daniel typed 2 weeks before he died. He never sent it. He was too weak. But he saved it in his email." I opened the paper. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't break. "If you're reading this." I guess I couldn't find the words. "Something's off. I feel like Emily's lying to me. About the money. About the will. She doesn't want me to talk to anyone but her doctor. I'm scared. But too tired to fight. Please, if anything happens, don't let her get away with it. Love you." The room fell into stunned, awful silence. Aunt Shirley wept quietly into her napkin. Emily's face twisted, fury and fear crashing together. "You can't prove," Max cut her off. Calm as stone. "We already have. Handwriting expert says it's forgery. Your witness isn't a notary. The hospice payments you made drained Daniel's account into yours. And," he added softly, "there's the recording. You and Jonathan. Planning this. In your own voices." Emily's chair scraped back. She staggered to her feet. Her face wild, eyes darting for help. But no one moved. Not her family. Not even her mother. It's not what it looks like," she whispered. But it was. Exactly what it looked like. A woman who saw her dying husband not as a partner, but as an obstacle. I stepped forward, holding a photo, Daniel holding baby Tommy, both of them grinning at me. "You tried to erase me, Emily. But Daniel knew who I was. And now, so does everyone else." That was the moment the spell broke. The lies, the charm, the mask, all gone. Emily didn't speak again. She grabbed her purse, turned, fled. The front door slammed. Tires screamed down the street. No one followed her. No one said a word. Just silence. And the slow, quiet sound of people finally seeing clearly. Max turned to me. We'll file on Monday. Probate court will freeze everything. The house. The accounts. Tommy's guardianship. It all comes back to you. I nodded. But my mind wasn't on houses or money. I was thinking of Daniel. Of the little boy who used to curl up on my chest during thunderstorms. And how tonight, at last, his voice had been heard. We sat there going through the case papers, our hands tired but our minds wide awake. The woman in charge spoke firmly. We're here to figure out if this new will, the one under Daniel Thompson's name, is real or not. And we need to look into how his things were passed on, and who should take care of little Thomas Thompson. Max stood up quietly but with confidence. He didn't waste time. He laid everything out clearly for the court, the fake signature, the phony notary stamp, the money trail that led straight to Jonathan Larkin. There was even an audio recording and photographs. The story had already hit the local newspaper that morning thanks to Jean's article. By lunchtime, everyone in town knew Emily's name for all the wrong reasons. Then Max pulled out Daniel's last email, the one he never got to send. This, Max said softly, is the voice of a dying man. A son who knew something was terribly wrong. Emily's lawyer, a nervous young man who looked like he wished he'd picked any other job, kept trying to interrupt, object, do something. But the judge wasn't fooled. After hours of witnesses talking, papers being passed around, and quiet tension filling the room, Judge Pearson finally leaned back and sighed. She looked right at Emily. This court finds enough proof of will forgery, financial trickery, and lying to the court system. The new will is cancelled. Emily's mouth dropped open. But the judge wasn't done. Because of your lies, your cruel behavior, and your clear neglect, you are no longer allowed to be the main guardian of Thomas Thompson. A quiet gasp ran through the room. Then the judge turned to me. Full custody, she said kindly, goes to Ruth Thompson, his grandmother. I didn't cry. Not yet. My hands were clasped so tight in my lap that they shook. And you are? Also given full control of Daniel's home and all that remains in his accounts, the judge added. Emily suddenly shot to her feet. This is a trick. She's turning everyone against me. I'm his wife. You were his wife, the judge said, firm and calm. But you made him your victim. Emily's breathing hitched. Her fists clenched. You can't take my son, she hissed. But the judge had already slammed the gavel. It was over. Emily screamed, not words, but this wild, broken sound. Like someone who just realized the story was over and the audience was gone. She spun toward me, her eyes full of anger. I loved him, she spat. You poisoned him against me. I stood slowly, looking her right in the eye. No, Emily. You did that yourself. She broke. Covered her face with her hands. Sobbed. Then ran from the courtroom like a kid caught stealing. No purse, no plan, no shoes. Just shame. She left town that same week. No goodbye. No appeal for custody. No noise. Just silence, the only honest thing she'd given in years. Later, I went back to Daniel's house. Funny how grief makes a house feel bigger, every wall, every corner filled with sadness. But now that the truth had been told, the house felt smaller again. Like a real home. I unlocked the front door with the old brass key, the one I'd kept on a ribbon in my purse for years. The lock turned smooth and easy. For the first time in so long, I walked in without feeling like an intruder. Emily had barely taken anything. Just what she could carry in one trip. The furniture was still there. So was Daniel's jacket on the hook by the door. Tommy's little toy car was still under the couch. But the feeling in the house was different. It wasn't hiding lies anymore. It was full of memories, honest ones. Of Daniel. I started in the kitchen, the same one where Emily once smiled and said, "You don't need to cook. We have staff for that." The same kitchen where she replaced my homemade pies with store tarts. Where she forgot to invite me to family dinners. I cleaned the counters until they shined. Scrubbed the sink until it sparkled. Lined the drawers with fresh paper. I opened the windows and let the breeze rush in, fresh and full of life. Like a breath of freedom. I made tea, chamomile, the way Daniel always liked it. The kettle sang softly, filling the quiet house with warmth instead of fear. Upstairs, Tommy napped in Daniel's old bed. His little body stretched out, thumb curled under his hand. He didn't ask for his mother. Not once. Kids know more than we think. He had seen the truth, even before the rest of us. He'd felt the sadness in Daniel, the coldness in Emily's smile. But now, as he slept, he smiled. Really smiled. And for the first time in a long while, so did I. That was enough for me. I carried my tea to the table and set it down next to an old notebook I'd found in the attic. It was leather-bound and still empty, as if waiting for someone to finally use it. I opened it to the first page and began to write. Dear Tommy, I wrote, one day you'll be old enough to ask questions. Real questions. And when that day comes, I want you to have the real answers. Not the ones tucked away in court papers or whispered when the grown-ups think no one's listening. I want you to know the truth that matters. Your father was a good man. Kind. Strong in quiet ways. He should have had more time in this world. But even more than that, he deserved honesty. You won't grow up believing lies. Not as long as I'm here. I stopped writing for a moment and took a slow sip of tea. The warm steam touched my face, like a soft hand. I don't need you to fight for him, I wrote. That's what I did, in the only way I knew how, with patience, with proof, and with the stubbornness of a mother who remembers everything. Every bedtime story. Every scraped knee. Every time he said, I love you like it was brand new. I only want this, Tommy, for you to know that in every family, someone must hold on to the truth. Even if their hands shake. Even if they're called too old, too soft, or too polite. Someone has to keep the real story safe. In our family, Tommy, that person is me. And maybe one day, it will be you. I signed it, Love, Grandma, folded the letter carefully, tied a red ribbon around the notebook, and slid it into the drawer. Beside my tea. The sun had started to rise. I walked to the front door and opened it just a little to let the morning in. The soft breeze smelled like fresh-cut grass, and something else. Something clean and new. Like forgiveness. I turned and looked at the kitchen table, the steaming tea, the notebook tucked safely away, the empty chair where Daniel used to sit. The light spilled across the floor in golden stripes. I smiled, just a little, and closed the door slowly. Not to shut out the past, but to start fresh. My way. In peace. And if you've ever been quieted. If you've ever been told you're just a mother, just a grandmother, forgotten, ignored, or pushed aside, listen closely. Your story matters. Because the truth never gets old. Justice doesn't always come with a loud bang from a judge's gavel. Sometimes, it comes with a letter, a memory, a woman who refuses to forget. Welcome to Her Yesterday by EMMA. A place where silence turns into strength. Where revenge takes the shape of tea, time, and truth. Stay a while. Listen. Because when a grandma finally speaks, the whole world leans in to hear.